when they have the time, or they're in the mood, or whatever the case may be. But whenever you're out and exploring, it becomes a lot more personal whenever it's not just something you do when you have the time or when you're in the mood for. Like, I've got things I wrote or photos I took on, say, like the day that I got married, or the days that my grandparents died, or the happiest or the worst times of my life. And that's the driving force for me with a lot of the history that I explore and discover in the woods. Because even though I might be one day hiking along a waterfall or out on the shore, and then another day looking for some abandoned cabin or crumbling old gravestone, I look at it all from the same emotional perspective. So rather than it just being about the names and the dates and the information, it's like what stories are going to be told. And in all of my books that are related to history, I'm always thinking that half the story is history itself, and the other half is my experience of it, the exploring and finding it. Because that's what really excites me. Like, I think it's great that there are historic buildings in the middle of a town that everybody can see and admire, but I'm excited by what I can discover in the woods that maybe nobody else has stumbled over. When I was a kid, I remember getting very disappointed when I realized, looking at maps of the world, that all these places had already been explored and discovered, so there wasn't anything left for me to find. But when I started exploring myself, I realized that it's true that I can't find a deserted island in the Pacific or something like that isn't on a map, but I can find all these places that are slipping out of living memory. And growing up in a place like the Annapolis Valley, I lived just outside of Bridgetown my whole life, you start to discover that it's really a perfect place to find history because of how little development actually went on, especially down in Annapolis County where I live. So, there isn't so many things getting bulldozed over or knocked down. And even for the history that can't be saved, like the many abandoned cabins that I found in the woods, just not having anything that they weren't in the way. Nobody was building in that woods. Nobody was using it for anything. So they stay there and they crumble and linger on for 30, 40, 50 years until somebody like me stumbles into them, takes some pictures, and maybe I hear a story about it right away. And then maybe 5, 10 years later, somebody says, "Oh, I saw your picture. Let me tell you all about this," and that sort of thing. Well, the starting point for me a lot of times will actually be the old maps. Now, this is an excerpt from the Kings County map from the 1860s by a man A.F. Church. And over the course of about a decade, he and his employees were contracted to make a detailed map of every individual county in Nova Scotia. And they're about as wide as this and a bit taller in natural size. This is zoomed in quite a bit on this scale. It would be like as big as the room. They're very detailed maps. You can get closer and closer and see quite a lot of detail. And this is up on the road to Morden, going up to the Bay Shore. And a lot of the times, the names that are written on them, he took a lot of care to write the surnames of all the people living in these areas. They're like a starting point. So I'll see a name and I'll say, "Oh, well, I have some idea of who lived there," and then I can go looking for any signs that they might have left behind. What was fascinating about these maps is that there's no hint of what would become abandoned over time and what would be maintained. Like you can see here on this map, you have the Morden Road going up here, you have McNally Road over the top, and down on this side you have, well, it was then called Ormsby Road, now that's Victoria Road, up to Victoria Harbour from Aylesford. And this road across the middle is Australia Road, and that's the road that became abandoned. Although looking on this old map, you'd have no reason to think that that would happen. They're all sort of equally marked, they have people living on them. Now, the community of Australia had nothing to do with the country. It was just named by somebody who'd always wanted to travel there, and he ended up here, so he called this community Australia. in the road as well. This is all just part of Morden now, but at one point it was its own community. So you can see on the map that there's a few surnames marked. You have Hicks, Stark, Blue, and 3 from the Husey family. And what I found looking through the woods, following these marks, I'm looking for, is there signs of any foundations? And I found here one of the Husey family foundations. Now these are almost all the same when I find them. They're just dry stacked stones, a sort of a vague square in the forest floor, and they're maybe not much to look at, but it gives you an idea of how well somebody built them, took the time to stack them properly. And, you know, they become exposed to the weather and the sky a good deal longer than they ever actually have home on top of them. Here I've spent probably 3-4 hours just cutting brush and pulling deadfall out of them. I mean, it's really a lot of work to just get a look at a hole in the ground. But there's a lot of hints of when you're coming to the right place. In the background, you can see a few tall trees that seem like they're in a bit of a row. Usually means somebody planted them. Look for a bit of a high spot. Because these old homes didn't have eaves troughs or anything for drainage, they almost always have a rise on all 4 sides to prevent the cellar from getting flooded. And these days, since they completed the LiDAR imagery of Nova Scotia a few years ago, that really helps finding these old foundations. Because what the LiDAR imagery does, that it sees through everything on the surface of the earth. So if you see a road going to a bridge, the bridge doesn't exist. It sees through that. The trees, everything that'd be in the way. And what I'll find for these old foundations is it'll be like a very distinct square in the forest floor, and that will help to get me there. But for years and years, I didn't have that to help me, so I was just pushing through the brush, someone randomly seeing if I could find something. Because when you're looking at a hand-drawn map from 1864, and you're trying to correlate that to modern Google Maps, there's a range of a few hundred meters in there. That is exactly where you think it might be. But it's always great to find it's a tangible way to connect to the history. You can touch the stones and feel how they were placed. And they're all the same, no mortar, no concrete to hold them together, just dry stacked stone history. And this is what you see at the start of Australia Road. I like to think of these as my version of a welcome sign. And whenever I see this, it's a great hint. Now this is by far the minority for these abandoned roads. And everything I map is a public right of way, so they are owned by the government. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these around the province. I read somewhere once in a government report that there's over 6,000 kilometers of public right-of-way, government-owned roads that anyone can use just in Nova Scotia. I mean, I hiked a lot, but I don't know if I'll live long enough to hike all of these. But only maybe 1 out of every 15 to 20 roads actually has any kind of warning like this. Most common is the white rectangle, no road maintenance, proceeded own risk. You'll see them matched with various yellow diamonds sometimes. Most often they'll say road closed. Sometimes road ends with like a distance, like 100 meters ahead. Not too often you'll see the road impassable, which is usually placed when there was a bridge that was washed out. Ahead of this on Australia Road, the Robinson Brook Bridge was washed out at one point, but the off-roaders rolled a big metal culvert down and filled it over with dirt. But as far as government maintenance is concerned, the road's impassable because they're not going to watch over it for you. I mean, one of the great things about the Department of Public Works, which was previously called Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, previously called the Department of Transportation, and probably called 3 more things in the next 10 years, is that they don't like to give up the roads. They don't like people taking them over. They don't like to give up ownership, partly for access to things like fire prevention, partly because they're needed to access any number of properties that go off of them. So they're not kept out for hikers. That's nothing really on their mind, but it's a great benefit for people like me trying to get off into the woods. And if you've done any amount of hiking, you realize very quickly how heavily clear-cut Nova Scotia is and how happy you are to have an actual path to get through the clear-cut. Because when I'm looking for something like an old foundation or an abandoned cemetery, if I had to walk through the stuff you see behind that sign the entire way to get there, I would lose my mind, because I already have to do that once I get to the farthest point, for another 30, 40 minutes sometimes, and it can be an awful lot of effort. But there probably should be a lot more of these signs, because what happens when they don't exist is that people keep going a little farther, they pass the last house, the last power pole, and they think, oh, it'll be okay. We'll just keep going a little farther. They can't be that bad, and believe me, it always is. And after a few times where I had to back up for 10, 15 minutes, or you do like your 18-point turn until you finally get pointing the other direction, you realize it's better to just pull up at the first sign of trouble and get out and start hiking. Because if you don't, you end up like this guy. And I say a guy because, we know it's a guy. It always is. I do meet a lot of women off-roading, but they do it in a vehicle that's made for the job, not this car. This is up on McGregor Road on the South Mountain, Torwick, Greenwood area. And it's amazing that he made it this far, because going up the steep hill is washed out, rutted. If he missed any of the high points, he would have got stuck sideways and hit bottom. So he's gone this far and gotten to the next area, which is a big little marshy area that is often flooded. So he turned around, and only then on the way out he's gotten stuck. But I'll find vehicles like this. They'll be there for a few days, few weeks, and then they'll get their buddy with a truck to pull them back out. They'll be gone. They're sort of like temporary signposts along the road. But I do find ones that are a lot more permanent now and then, like this one. This is up in a place called St. Joseph's. Most of the places I'm talking about are in my book here. This river was once a road. St. Joseph's is a little bit southwest of Antigonish. And this would have been all on land owned by the Gohan family. And one of the most fascinating things about, if you can find the site of an old homestead, and we just dumped some of our trash in the woods, they dumped it all there. So it's just something that was done. And usually the best place to look is if the property ends at a large embankment or down into a stream like this does. There's a big hill up behind it, and then the farmer's fields start above there. So if you go down to these places, either they were thinking, oh, it's a good place to get it out of sight, or they're thinking, oh, that'd be really fun to watch that fall down the hill. So you'll find these old truck bodies and piles of metal tin cans, glass bottles, that kind of thing. I'm not sure why old trash should be more charming in a way than modern trash. But I'm sure in 100 years there'll be somebody seeing our plastic crap, and they'll be thinking, oh, beautiful history. I'm sure they'll love it. But to see this junk thing, I mean, maybe if somebody found my 2009 Honda Civic in the woods right about now, they wouldn't think much of it. But 1940s Chevrolet truck, or what's left of it, it's great. Stripped for parts, of course. Everything that could possibly be gone. You almost always see the hood gone, because no farmer could say no to a giant flat piece, or fairly flat piece of metal, either to patch a hole in his barn wall, or just cut bits out of it for whatever use could be done. And the beds are almost always gone. They'd saw them off for trailers and so on. But yeah, it's that tangible connection that's so great to me. Sometimes I get a bit of a story and I know a bit more. Sometimes I just know the name of who lived there and some of the stuff they left behind. But like that emotional connection is what excites me. In school you only hear about kind of two things: the names and the dates, and the big wars. And that's fascinating to a certain degree, but we're not really largely descended from the people that did anything significant. We're descended mostly from ordinary people who world events barely affected them, and they hardly even noticed them happening. Unless your kid was getting sent off in a world war, you probably drove this truck in the same circle of the whole world you ever saw, which in the case of this family was probably between here and Antigonish, and then back to here and then back to Antigonish, and that's about all they ever did with it. And then here it lies as sort of a permanent, tangible reminder of the life that they lived. Now, other bits of history in stone that I love to find are the old bridge abutments. Because we don't live in the land of stone bridges, at least barely at all, there's only a handful in the province, what you'll usually find in the country are these old abutments where they would fell trees across the top, and they would have a new bridge often every 5 to 10 years, or just however long it lasted before it rotted. And people don't always realize how short-lived these old bridges were. One of the main reasons why there used to be so many covered bridges built was not just to keep the snow and the ice off of it, but just to slow it down from rotting so quickly as untreated wood would do. And this is out back on the old Dalhousie Road. Now, if you've been up east or west Dalhousie, you know how you can't really go directly between the two. And if you're coming out of West Dalhousie, Albany Cross area, you have to go down Highway 10, go up through Springfield and Falkland Ridge, and then to East Dalhousie. But the road was originally going straight through as one of the original important highways to connect Annapolis Royal roundabout to Halifax. But as the port in Annapolis Royal started to show signs that it had no real permanent future, with the high tide swings and the ships and the tall ships getting bigger, then a lot of the Dalhousie Road really didn't have any future in it. So this large section where there are no houses of about 6 kilometers was abandoned, and then they let the bridge go here where it crossed section of the LaHave River, and this is about as far up the LaHave you can get, still call it the LaHave. If you've seen it out where it comes to Bridgewater, you know that it's quite a lot bigger. Although in this narrow point, the current's still very fast, so you wouldn't exactly want to go in here. But just to see how the stones were wrangled into position is so fascinating to me. Whatever primitive levers and tools they could get, horses to sort of hold them. It wasn't meant to be pretty. These aren't perfectly stacked up. It was just whatever would hold the bank from collapsing while they laid the bridge across it. And it's all long since gone, but the stones, as they placed them and moved them, they kind of remain to give you a hint of the life that they lived. Now, probably the only stone history I find that's intact at all is if I come across an old fireplace or chimney in the woods. And these are great. I mean, it always makes me want to go back and maybe start the first fire in them in 75, 80 years, who knows. This is actually up the closest abandoned road to where I live. There's a lot of the abandoned roads that are most fascinating in the valley are the North Mountain roads. And they stay open quite well because of the erosion. It's always washing out any new growth. And this is up Chute Road, which ran from the Bridgetown area up over the mountain to the Hampton area in Annapolis County. And I don't know exactly who lived here. All I know for sure is that it's not on the 1870s county map, but it appeared sometime soon after that. And the last people to take over the home, which had been abandoned at the time, were part of the wave of the hippies and draft dodgers that showed up in the 1970s. And they took over the home, and unfortunately at that time burned down, leaving only the chimney behind. So it just sort of stands there on its own in the woods as sort of a cairn of a sort to the past. And it's a great sight. I see them now and then. There's one in Crossburn, the old logging community, East Dalhousie area, down in the Acadian French Shore area. I found one there as well. But they're great little sites. But more often than not, it's these loose dry stack stones. Here I'm up Awalt Road, which is in Lunenburg County, not far from Bridgewater. And this is the remnant of an old sawmill dam. And other frame just to the right here is the stream running through, and then there's a similar wall going off to that side. And all these sawmill dams are pretty much the same. They're just dry stack stones banked up on the back with dirt, and they're there to hold back the dirt to run the water through and power a wheel and get power for the sawmill. And if they found that they weren't getting enough water through the days, they'd empty it out. They'd build another course or two of stone, hold back a bit more water, and then let more through the next day. Because we don't live in an area of the world with a whole lot of really large year-round streams and rivers, this is pretty much what you'll see following any major stream in any large historic community. I'll go on an abandoned road and I'll cross a stream, and the first thing I'm thinking is, I need to look up and down here and see what kind of dams were left behind. And I'll usually find one, sometimes two or three, and they're all long since gone, with anything holding water back in the middle. But you can see the life that they lived, and they often didn't last terribly long. They either lasted till they cut all the trees in the area, or in other cases they were replaced by larger, more central mills. And then of course once the trucks came in, they were hauling the logs out. They really didn't need so many mills scattered through the woods. But in a time where you were relying on oxen or horses to pull a full tree out to the nearest mill, you weren't really wanting to go any farther than you had to. So this is why you find so many of them. But just like the foundations, it's a great tangible connection to the past, is that they're right there on the forest floor in the same arrangement, placement that they were in 1850 or whenever it was. And nothing's changed since then, except all the moss. So the final little bit of stone history, I guess you could say, that I find is also the one that makes me the most nervous, and that's these old wells. So this is a Parker family homestead off of Parker Road in a little bit south of Bear River area. And as you can see, there's nothing holding it together but the friction and the weight of the stones themselves. The funny thing about this particular well, and not only is it one of the deeper ones that I found, as you can see, it's never seemed to have any water in it. And I've been here after the spring melt or a heavy rain, and I never see anything in the bottom. There's a chance that under the leaf litter there's a little bit, but it's only just up the hill from the west branch of Bear River, and they were probably trying to save themselves having to climb down and haul water up. So I certainly hope that they didn't dig all this well just to hit nothing, because that would have been an awful lot of effort for no success. But the reason that, of course, these make me somewhat nervous is because a lot of people have this image of a well, historic well in the woods, which if you ask somebody to draw a well, the way that they would draw it would be with a structure about this tall off the ground, a ring of stones cemented together, and it'd be kind of like the wooden yoke with the piece to haul up the bucket. But because, like I said before, you almost never see anything in the woods of Nova Scotia that used any kind of mortar, that was not the case with these wells. They're flush with the forest floor, and any additional structure over top was just made of wood, and that's long since gone. So as you're walking along, you'll be within a couple paces of many of these, if not almost on top of them before you even see them, because there's no sign above the level of the forest floor. And that goes for every single well I've ever found in the woods. They're just holes with no warning. So this is why when I find an old homestead site, the first thing I look for is the well, because I don't really want to be surprised, sort of the morbid way, I guess, that somebody could be responsible for the death of somebody long after they themselves have died because of having covered a well. So I would suggest that if you know anyone who's done it, they go back and uncover it. There really is only two final ways to make a well safe. Either you mark the edge of it really well, like stacking stones up, or you just fill it in. But covering it should never be considered an option. What they'll do at certain historic sites, like the wells up in the old ghost town of Roxbury, up the South Mountain Paradise area, is they've marked them all with wooden tripods. Now those don't last forever, but while they're standing there, you'll see them from the distance. You can kind of hold on to them and look down to the well. And I do hate to see a well just filled in because it's a great, bit of history in the woods. But yeah, don't give in to the temptation to cover a well, because I think that there is a lot of people that just haven't thought about how that eventually will become a problem just by hiding it from sight. So I want to read you this little piece. This is a bit more of a story about a place from somewhere that I've uncovered. This is up Dodge Road, which is runs through a few communities in Annapolis County, Spa Springs up through Forest Glade toward Margarettsville. And there's a bit of the history of the place. Hiking in the twilight is a beautifully unnerving sensation. I rarely do it anywhere new, but I've made this mountain pass many times before. Josiah and Benjamin Dodge were the earliest settlers, responsible for making the way through these woods. Their narrow trail has a ghostly feeling about it. Crowded curves and bends, carrying centuries of travelers before. No one settled on high in the early days, and no one since. No need with fertile land in the valley behind and the vault below. That latter hollow peeks out now and then, with a view of working farms through bare branches and a sinking sight below. These ridges are rocky and windswept, and roots cling for purchase. Right at freezing, steady steps are just enough to push the chill back. Darkness is like a nest that I trust to keep me comforted. I'll make it out just in time for that blue light to fall. There are few local places with more folklore attached than the deep, dark space known as the Hole in the Vault. I'd sought this place for years, off and on, picking along the slippery slopes between Vault and Dodge roads. Now and then, someone would offer vague directions, rarely more helpful than narrowing down a general area. Information I already knew. Most folks hadn't even been there themselves. Coming up empty after a dozen searches, I decided to give it one last shot before heavy rain made mud and rocks too slippery to scale. This time, I followed topographic maps made recently with LiDAR, aiming through brush to the sharpest outcropping I could find. Deep in the woods between Melbourne Square and Forest Glade, I finally reached a series of jagged fissures along the North Mountain ridgeline. 3 narrow slits dropped down into the rock, but only one, a still icy entryway, continued to a cave. In a somewhat unnerving scenario, it drifts on a shallow diagonal before abruptly plummeting straight down like a well. The first drop is a good 20 feet, and that's just the start of your fall. It's been said that these depths connect to water from the Bay of Fundy, though that's unlikely, with the shore being nearly 5 kilometers away. The Hole in the Vault was first written about in 1892 in a magazine called The Youth's Companion. The reporter was Charles G.D. Roberts, a poet. Everything he wrote was secondhand, and here I am, giving it to you third. He was told a tale by one of the 3 boys who decided to discover just how deep and far the cave could go. After dropping down to an outer gallery, one was strapped to a rope and lowered in a shaft that seemed to have no bottom. A collapse of the wall shattered his headlamp and trapped him for some time, and he nearly didn't make it up. After this incident, local farmers plugged the entrance with trees to prevent further entry, but those have long since rotted away. Now, I'm no cave diver, and as such have limited interest in dropping out of sight. It's enough sometimes just to stand on the lip of history, peering into an uneasy past. There will always be someone saying, let's go farther, let's seek secrets, see what the shadows are keeping from us. Tonight I learned that porcupines are an active part of that. Their droppings scattered in thousands, stinking like mud. Babies chirping discontentedly at my disturbance. Hundreds of feet from this vantage, the view across the vault is breathtaking, stark and leafless, mostly muted of the outside world. He couldn't feel more alone for trying. My legs were burning by the time I came back to my car, and I felt content for finally finding one more secret the wild was keeping. Now, it is funny when I'm looking for these places how I would say most directions that people give you, they're more like a story intended for people who already know where the thing is than they are actual directions. You know, like your friend says, oh, you remember that place out in the woods? And you say, oh yeah, I remember it. And then you tell someone who's never been there and it's completely unhelpful to them. Or it's kind of like the joke of how people are so interested in telling you about what was somewhere that they don't remember to tell you what is there. Like I've heard people say something like, oh, you know, you need to go to the Scotia Bank in the Greenwood Mall. It's down there where the Zellers used to be. Which is great, but it's been a Walmart for a long time, and you should know that right now. I mean, it's wonderful to know what used to be there, but you know, what is there now is the big question. Or people will say something like, you know, turn right at the big tree. You know, the big tree's gone anyway, even if you could recognize it. And then you turn left at John's old cabin, and you know that burned down in '68, so it's not very helpful now. So one of the most beautiful things for me to see is these old sections of abandoned road that are paved, and you don't find them much. It's basically the big process to make a final decision on a lot of these abandoned roads happened 50s, 60s, 70s, and they sort of decided this one stays dirt, we'll pave this one, we'll abandon that one. So they weren't normally paving a road and then abandoning it. But in the case of this one, this is Canaan Mountain Road. This will be the main way coming off the South Mountain down to New Minas area, just up the road from here, really. They had paved it already by this point, and then in the early 70s, when the 101 construction's going on, they decide that they want to relocate the exit a little farther to the east, so this becomes a dead end. So, but as these paved roads grow in, they kind of create this tunnel of trees because the asphalt resists the growth coming through. So you have it coming in the bottom and then the top. You have this sort of natural tunnel. And you can faintly see the lines almost completely faded away there in the middle of the road. Sometimes people will see a picture I have of like an abandoned asphalt road, and they'll be like, oh man, they're in such great shape, you know, if only they could make them like that now. And what I would say is that if you never drive on a road, it will stay in wonderful condition, which is the case of this, you know. So if it hasn't been driven on really since before I was born, yeah, it is in quite great condition by those standards. So this road was under a lot of conflict with the nearest neighbor for quite a while because he decided he didn't want people going down it, so he would fell trees across it, and people would cut it out, he'd fell more, and so on. And there was a little bit of that, you know, trash dumped on the bottom of the road there, off and on, and you know, teenagers driving down, parking their cars and doing the kind of things that teenagers do in parked cars. And but the thing that people often fail to remember is that just because a road is very quiet and there's not a lot of activity on it, it's still a public road. And this is something that I've had quite a lot of push back and forth with people over the years because it's hard for people in a quiet country area to understand the concept sometimes of the fact that just because a road isn't being used very often or hardly at all does not mean that they actually own the road. So I'm always posting pictures like this where you can, or excerpt from the property records, and I'll highlight the abandoned section in red. So you can see here, this goes down here, and actually this is so wide because they were originally going to put the new Mice exit where they moved it over here. Built the new Canaan Road, moved it there, but they had already appropriated some of the land for the on-ramps. Not on this side yet, but on this side. So I'll highlight that and I'll put it online and remind people that the roads that I'm documenting, they're not just being used because everybody wants to have a fight with their neighbor about, going on their property, but these aren't their property. They're, right-of-ways, they're public for everyone to use. People will try to say things to me sometimes. Like I said to a guy once, I said, I'm just passing through beside your property here on this right-of-way. And he says to me, it's not your right-of-way. And I said, well, that's not what a right-of-way is. It's not mine, it's not yours. There can be instances where these roads are private or there are an agreement, like some sort of easement agreed between the neighbors. But everything I document is a public right-of-way because what I'm interested in doing is making sure that people can get through the woods and hike through these places, and there shouldn't have to be any disagreement about who gets to use them one way or another. But that doesn't mean I don't get quite a lot of pushback at times. This is an interesting example of that, where I was trying to provide an alternative for people crossing private property by using an old right-of-way that had been disused for a long time. So this is up in Hillsburn on the north, over the North Mountain, on the Bay Shore, Delapse Cove, northwest of Annapolis Royal, if you know the area. This is an old fish plant up there. For years they came in the mouth, they built the mouth of Anderson Brook up here, kind of like a wharf. So they take the boats in, unload their fish, and smoke them in here. And the building is pretty, I like it, but it's charred within an inch of its life from being filled with smoke for so many years. There was racks up to the ceiling and smoke escaping out the top. And because of that, it's very popular with the seagulls now, because they go in where the smoke used to come out and roost in there. But for years, people have been going to the end of the abandoned road, or not the abandoned road, the active road to the other side of the stream, and walking behind the building to access the shore. And a couple winters ago, the owners decided they didn't want people crossing over there, which is fine, it's their right. But I was looking on the records, and whenever I get messages like this, I always screenshot them and share them publicly. And it's not because I'm looking to have like a fight or some drama with people. It's because whenever you get a message that's designed to frighten you off from something that it's your right to use, they hope that you'll do what most people do, which is like, oh, I don't want to get in an argument with somebody. I'll take that down. I won't tell anyone about it. I won't publicize that. But if I'm not standing up for these roads, the government agencies that look after them, they don't have time to make sure that someone isn't blocking them or isn't preventing use. There's a famous case that you can read about that happened in the Lower Five Islands, west of Truro, where somebody actually was forced to have to sell their cabin because the landowner near the mouth of the road put a gate up and blocked it. And they finally had to give up on it because there was so little pushback and enforcement. So sometimes it falls to the local individuals who maybe are going to put up a bit of a fight. But there's sort of a key line toward the end of this that I want to highlight, where he says, you want access to the bay, buy a piece of land, otherwise leave it alone. Now, I don't know about you, but I really can't afford to buy land every time I want to go to the beach. I can't afford any land, to be honest. But the mindset of folks that push back against these sort of things often is that nobody really needs to go anywhere. You know, they leave their house, they go to work, they go shopping, they come back home. They don't think, oh, hiking is a valuable activity, going to the beach and so on. And even when they know for a fact, because everybody knows where their property ends and begins and where the next nearest road is. And whether it's an abandoned right-of-way that the bridge is washed out and it's long disused, It's the same public road as the Highway 1 or the road outside your house or anything where your driveway comes out to. They're all existing in the same state. So I'm always trying to remind people of that. So I'm going to wrap up with one last story from my book, and then I hope I didn't catch all too long here. So this is another one for you guys up this way. This is Fielding Road, and this road runs through Robinson Corner area. Robinson Corner is it's a fascinating little area up the Jasper Mountain, south side of Jasper Valley, and it's an intersection of about 5 different roads that are abandoned. 5 different roads, 4 of them abandoned. You have Old Davidson Road, Fielding Road, Nicktown Road below that. You have Fielding Road, Melanson Road, and then you go over a bit ways and you get to Telegraph Road. And this is all like a holdover of the fact that before they had the bridges a little bit farther up Gansborough River, where you cross on the Highway 101 now, they were going more overland from Falmouth to Gansborough. So there's a big network of roads there, almost all of which are now abandoned. And this is one of them. But it was blocked for a few years. So I'll just read you this last bit. The feeling of this forest is like sighing under shelter. A lot of life pushing back against the fears of memory dying. There's thick cloud cover beyond the canopy and a thread of rain. Leaves diffusing the light and dimming the shadows. I'm inside the green with no hint of the sky. Some kind of down-home adventure here. Narrow bends through a sleepy space. Deeper down the road, a couple of turns taken. Won't be long before it's woods on all sides. Nature does well in the gloom. Signs of life, but no map or direction. I slip along a beaver blockade, making a march into a tiny lake. Lose count of frogs underfoot. All sorts of trilliums and lady slippers, more than I've ever seen elsewhere. But for 3 long years, Fielding Road was illegally blocked from access. This was the work of a man called Kevin Conrad. And the homemade warning sign was his, everything written on it untrue. It read, "This is not a public road or deeded right of way. It is private." Those are all lies, as Fielding Road is public indeed. It appears as such on every map, including the oldest dating back to 1872, when the Robinson family first settled here. More crucially, it's present on the current Department of Public Works records as K-class and unmaintained public road. Property records agree as well. For a few hundred meters where this public right-of-way borders his property, Mr. Conrad felled dozens of trees across the path. He parked his RV there and his excavator, which he'd been using to clear an area for construction. But what happened on this bit of land 2 decades earlier is far more worrying. November 2006 marked the discovery of the body of Leslie Ann Conrad, found by a hunter in a shallow grave. She was Kevin's wife, gone missing since October, a fact he hadn't bothered to report himself. The police investigated him but never filed charges, and ever since that event he'd been the prime suspect in her murder, but remained free due to lack of evidence. I passed by here in the dying days of April, and noticing no one around, pulled up at the corner and walked the first kilometer, ducking under and climbing over felled trunks. On my way back, I tore down all the misleading warning signs. After heading home, this road never crossed my mind through the following months, but then I stumbled on a news story saying that Kevin Conrad was discovered dead in his excavator on May 1st, just 4 days after my last visit. He might well have been in there when I passed by. I remember spotting his machine through the trees, mired in the mud, and hadn't moved from that position in the newspaper photos. His death was ruled to be of natural causes. And what does all this mean? Well, for wanderers like me, there's no one stopping us from using Fielding Road. But for the children of Leslie Ann Conrad, the man, their father, they suspected murdering their mother will never be held accountable. Perhaps there's a certain closure in knowing that he's gone from the land of the living, closure and an opening. The death of a lie about what was and wasn't, and some sort of path to the future. The woman who was buried here was an active hiker herself. Leslie Ann Conrad represented Nova Scotia at the 1978 National Campers and Hikers Association Campvention in Colorado. I imagine she'd have hated to see a heart-waking trail like this restricted from public access. She was loved, cared for, and remembered. Like most tragic tales, all is not resolved, but some, in the end, is restored. This, I wondered for a few years when this was going on, why the road hadn't been reopened. It accesses quite a lot of different forest roads that were popular with the ATV riders and so on. And I shared about it a few times, told people I knew. I said, maybe people want to get out there. People live a little closer than me, cut the brush out, and so on. Now, nobody ever said to me, oh, we don't really want to do that because we're afraid of the man who's done it, or maybe you don't want to go out there and tear his signs down. No, I didn't hear anything like that. I would have appreciated the heads up. But later, people told me all sorts of stories. I mean, within a week of his death, the road was reopened, the brush was cut out, like it never existed. People told me all sorts of stories. One man said, I used to work with this guy. There was an incident where we were hauling some heavy equipment and it was hanging off the strap and it was going over my head and about to fall. And Kevin Conrad stood there with his arms crossed, just sort of smirking, waiting to see what would happen instead of warning anybody. And I've heard versions of that kinds of story about his general disregard for life. But it's fascinating how, people say in obituaries sometimes, like, oh, he was loved by everybody, or so on. And now and then, when I come across a story of somebody like this that was loved by nobody and universally hated, it's almost like a kind of achievement in a way, because you think, you'd have to try really hard to get everyone to hate you, but he seemed to manage that. Now, just the last slide showing, I should say, people often talk like, people will come into an area and they'll buy up some land and they'll have a conflict with their neighbors and so on. And this still happens. Sometimes someone will come from Ontario, they'll buy a cottage, they'll start blocking some old path or something. This definitely happens, but I should say this, I always try to remind people that, as me, a lifelong Nova Scotian, the biggest problems I've had, the most difficulty with people who are criminals or blocking abandoned roads or just causing general trouble, stealing from their neighbors, whatever it is, by far the biggest problem with Nova Scotians are lifelong Nova Scotians. And that's just the way it is. We like to say, oh, these people came from away and they caused all this trouble. No, we cause most of our own trouble. It's just the way it is. I said that once to somebody at a talk last year, and they stood up in the middle of it to say that I was making Nova Scotia look bad. The middle of the talk, just say, I say, I'm not the tourist bureau. To me, as somebody who's always lived there, I'm as fascinated by the downsides of our citizenry as I am all the great parts of what make us province. So yeah, this is the last slide here. This is just the map, and I've got them color coded by county. These are I've got. If you go online, you zoom in, you'll see that I've got like the parking, like where I recommend you pull up and stop to hike, and then I've got the lines drawn out. So you can pull up the map and hike any of them and have a good time, hopefully. But you can see I pretty much finished like Annapolis County. There's like 50-some in Annapolis, 50 some in Kings County, some in Digby County, some in Lunenburg County. And when I was working on this book, I got a little bit farther afield to Colchester, Antigonish, Cape Breton, and so on, just so there'd be a bit of a variety on top of my local exploring. But as you can see, there's, you know, when I took this screenshot, there was like 645,000 views. So I assume people are constantly using it, and that's exciting to me. I mean, there's like, I think there's like another 100,000 since I made this. But it's that usage of these roads that guarantee that they don't get overgrown, they don't get blocked by troublesome people, whatever the case is. They keep these roads open, and they are a lifeline into so many of parts of the woods that would otherwise be very difficult to drag yourself into. But yeah, so that's what I'm always working on as I get through the province, and I know I'm over, so I'm going to shut up now. But I guess if anyone's got any questions before I wrap up.
You mentioned the abandoned town of Roxbury and the tripods over the wells. Is there an organization that helps look after that, or is it just something?
I think it's Dave Whitman and Dave Whitman's. It's a Whitman. But yeah, I think it's all down. Yeah, I don't think there's really been any organization. Although eventually it's supposed to be, hopefully, eventually, maybe one day, probably, hopefully, maybe, maintain some sort of provincial park.
Oh.
But we'll see about that, right? But it is protected land, which is the important first step. Like, it's not going to be all cut down. But yeah, I think it's just whoever Dave Whitman's gotten together to help that's really done everything that's happened out there.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Like earlier on in the presentation, you mentioned something about Roxbury that I hear. Is that like what they call the Electric City?
No, the Electric City was out back of Weymouth, and why they called it that was, so historic at the time, is that they produced their own electricity through, I believe, water power in a time where no community in Western Nova Scotia had actual electricity. So yeah, it was a big deal at the time. But no, Roxbury, that's like way down Weymouth, Digby County, whereas Roxbury was a little logging community south of Paradise, Lawrencetown, Middleton area in the county. All right.
I have a question. So who takes the photographs of you?
I do. Yeah, I carry a tripod with me everywhere I go. It's funny, on one hand, scale is important. How big is that tree? How, you put a person in it, and since I'm hiking alone, the person's got to be me. But the other reason, funnily enough, before I even started hiking so much, when I started my daily journal in 2007, I decided, I'll make one of the pictures I take every day of me. And why did I decide to do that? It definitely wasn't because I really loved pictures of me. It was actually because the thing I hated most in the world was having pictures of me taken. So I thought, well, if you want people to care about anything you're creating, what should you do? Something that's hard for you to do. And what's the best way to stop hating something is just do it a lot. So despite the fact that there is now thousands of pictures of me on the internet, it only started because the main thing I wanted in life was there to be 0 pictures of me on the internet. So I guess I must have got over it at some point.
I know you like hiking alone. I follow you online, so.
I was wondering who that was.
Yeah.
I kept looking over my shoulder.
Do you ever walk with anybody else?
I was 90-some% of my time on my own. Yeah, I mean, really, it's only if maybe one of my older brothers is around. My mother's almost 70, and she's hiked with me on a number of these. So she's almost as active as I am, which is great to see. But yeah, it's just sort of drag along a relative now and then. But yeah, aside from that, I'm pretty much on my own. I mean, I really appreciate the silence and solitude of it, and I find that it helps with like writing, because if you're like talking to people all the time, then you have nothing left to say when you go to write somehow. So, like I might seem talkative tonight, but trust me, I might not talk to anybody for weeks. All right.
Well, thank you. We just have a little momentum of your day, keeping here with us and something else. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It was very interesting, and my husband and I like to drive the old back roads, so we can understand how you feel about exploring and looking at things in a different perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's fun to just find out where everything goes.
Yeah.
I should say one of the things that's most fun for me is like I've driven every single road in the valley, and I've hiked every road that you can't drive, and I wonder how many people could say that. And it's fun to have this mental map in your head where you've connected every single dot that there is. Yeah, it's great.
So are your books?
Yeah, I got some books in the back if anybody wants any, and yeah, just come see me.
Great.
Great.
Thank you so much. Before you leave, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming. And our next speaker event will be May 21st, at which time we'll have Allison McGee do a talk on the Nova Scotia glass, its history, its story about the Nova Scotia glass industry, and he'll bring some samples and so on with him. So that will be our next speaker. So thank you for coming.